The air was still thick with the stench of burnt ozone and blood. Craters littered the ground, steaming like wounds in the Earth's flesh, and the last of the human resistance lay smoldering in twisted heaps of armor and bone. Captain Rian Vox staggered forward through the battlefield's haze, his side bleeding, rifle empty, lungs scorched with dust and plasma. The silence was broken only by the slow crunch of alien boots pressing into ash and ruin. Above him, the orbital platforms flickered as the alien fleet's last barrage completed its task. Earth's last defensive satellite, named Vigil, cracked and fell in flames across the upper atmosphere, a dying comet heralding the end. Vox watched it go down, unmoving, expression unreadable. He did not weep. Not anymore. There was nothing left to mourn. From behind, a shadow loomed. A Marnai warlord, 8 feet tall, limbs plated in chromed armor, and skin like iridescent oil, leveled its tri-pronged spear. "You live," it growled, voice oily with amusement. "Unfortunate. We wanted your death to be broadcast." Vox did not answer. He met the alien's eyes and saw no curiosity, no concern, just the same thing he had seen from every species in the Galactic Compact. Disdain. Pity, perhaps, flavored with cruelty. To them, humans had always been a mistake. A low-gravity accident. Too fragile, too emotional, too short-lived. Barely sentient. "Bind him," the warlord ordered. "He'll die on Telkura's steps, like the rest of his kind." 2 more aliens descended. Vox didn't resist. He'd already done what he needed. His eyes drifted past the burning ruins of their stronghold, Fort Carbon, humanity's final command post. It was nothing more than shattered ferrocrete and mangled scaffolding now. But beneath it, buried far deeper than the aliens knew, it waited. The war had not started with strategy. It had started with panic. The Galactic Compact had found Earth by accident. First contact wasn't war, it was extermination. One message from the Council: you will surrender your planet and resources or face sterilization. Earth's answer had been a single missile fired in blind defiance. It didn't even hit the target. The response had been swift and absolute. Orbital bombardments. Mass enslaving of survivors. Cities glassed. In less than a month, 90% of human civilization was reduced to ash. And yet they hadn't won. Humans scattered. They survived. On moons, on derelict ships, in fractured bunkers buried beneath blackened continents. They were hunted, yes, but never entirely broken. And when the resistance began to whisper of something final, something bigger, the galaxy laughed. Vox had been a soldier long before the war. He'd served in old Earth's last global military before the sky fell. His body bore its marks, scars across his ribs from shrapnel, a limp that made him move with quiet stubbornness. But it wasn't his strength that had earned him command. It was his memory. He remembered every slaughter, every insult, every lie wrapped in diplomacy. He remembered his squad mates by name, even after they burned. And above all, he remembered what they stole from Earth. Not just its cities, but its dignity. They took humanity's pride, and they laughed as they took it. Now, they were preparing to laugh one last time. As the transport doors slammed shut and Vox was dragged aboard, he watched the sky. The last fragments of Earth's orbital defenses winked out. Across the stars, the alien fleet repositioned, preparing for their final assault. Not just on Earth, but on every human refuge they discovered. They were calling it a cleansing. Their arrogance was expected. It had been cultivated for centuries. After all, what was humanity to them? Their weakest enemy. Their shortest war. A blemish in the archives. What they didn't know was that Vox had spent the last 2 years feeding that perception. He had surrendered bases deliberately, broadcasted fake distress signals, planted traitors who whispered of despair. In doing so, he had bought time. Just enough time for the engineers on Cradle 9 to finish Project Avernus. The galaxy thought it was winning because that's what humans wanted it to think. But they weren't building weapons to fight back. They were building a trap. Something ancient. Something irreversible. The Marnai warlord stood before him again as the transport began to ascend. Why do you resist, human? What's left of your species worth fighting for? Vox leaned forward slowly, lips cracked, blood still leaking down his chin. He smiled, not wide, not smug, just a quiet curve, like he knew a joke the warlord would never understand. Everything he said. The alien scoffed, stepped back, and turned away. The galaxy had already decided what humans were. It couldn't imagine anything else. That was the weakness they had never expected. Humans didn't fight to win. They fought to make sure they weren't forgotten. They fought to be understood, even if it meant leaving only ashes behind. As the ship climbed into the void, Vox closed his eyes. His restraints bit into his wrists, but his heartbeat remained steady. In 24 hours, every remaining human outpost would broadcast a single message. We surrender. We accept your terms. We'll lay down our arms. And the aliens would laugh. They would prepare the stage. They would gather fleets. They would expect submission. They wouldn't realize that surrender was the signal. By then, it would be too late. Humanity had learned something the galaxy never could. When you have nothing left to lose, you have nothing left to fear. And when fear dies, so does mercy. The countdown had already started. The cruiser drifted silently toward the dead star, its hull glinting in the cold void. Inside its darkened cargo hold, Captain Rian Vox sat chained to a cold slab of steel, staring into nothing. Around him, the stink of metal and burnt plasma clung to the air like mildew. Alien guards, hulking forms of chitin and armor, stood watch, silent and bored, their weapons slack in their claws. Vox didn't move. His heart counted time more precisely than any chronometer. 17 hours to deployment. The Galactic Compact had chosen this system for its symbolism. A dying sun, its last embers flickering weakly, surrounded by barren planets and rings of shattered moons. A metaphor for humanity's end. They called it the final stage. A show. A spectacle. The last broadcasted eradication of a human race, live to billions of alien systems. The Empire believed in dramatic endings, clean, public, recorded. They didn't understand that humans were not written for clean endings. The guards murmured in their own tongue, exchanging crude jokes about his weight, his scars, his scent. Vox understood none of the words, but the rhythm of contempt never needed translation. They still believed he was broken, that he was just another stubborn survivor being marched to the final curtain. Their underestimation was more than tactical. It was cultural. 14 hours to deployment. The ship's gravity shifted as docking procedures began. Above the hold, the main bay doors opened to reveal Telcura Base, a vast, artificial plateau carved into a hollow moon. Tiered platforms bristled with alien troops. Gigantic screens pulsed with bright glyphs and a countdown timer. Massive banners fluttered on windless poles, each bearing the crests of races that had shared in Earth's humiliation. The galaxy had gathered to witness extinction. The final surrender had been accepted. Humanity's surviving outposts, 5 small colonies, barely functional, had submitted their coordinates. Their leaders had appeared on galactic feeds, shackled, offering peace. Vox had been named the final emissary. The war was over, the council claimed. The broadcast would mark the end of unnecessary resistance. It would unite the galaxy under a single truth. Weakness has no place in progress. What no one saw was the tremor beneath the performance. The final gesture was not peace. It was misdirection. Vox had helped engineer every word of the surrender. His people had memorized every line. And buried in those lines were cues. Cues for action. 11 hours to deployment. He was marched out into the preparation chamber. Inside, technicians adjusted the restraints on his arms and legs, scanned his vitals, and made minor modifications to the collar around his neck, a device meant to execute him publicly by neural override. They didn't notice the tiny flicker in the collar's core. A human implant buried behind Vox's left ear pulsed once, then went dark. From across the chamber, a thin figure watched him. A Drail overseer, species known for their precision and cruelty. This one wore red armor, its eyes glittering with curiosity rather than malice. It approached slowly. "You've orchestrated quite a drama," it said. "Your people begged for this mercy, yet your expression lacks gratitude." Vox didn't respond. The Drail continued. You're aware that by this time tomorrow, every human refuge will be sterilized. Your species will be recorded as extinct. A footnote. A failure. Vox met its gaze. Then why are you still talking? A pause. The Drail blinked. I study extinction. Fascinates me, it said at last. Most species collapse with dignity. Yours clings like parasites to dead rocks. As if extinction isn't acceptable unless it hurts someone else. Vox smiled slightly. You noticed. The overseer tilted its head. What is it you believe you've done? Vox's voice dropped to a whisper. I stopped trying to win. That's what I've done. The Drail seemed momentarily unsure how to respond. Vox was escorted away before it could speak again. 8 hours to deployment. Within the moon's central control spire, alien dignitaries gathered. Cameras hovered like silent insects, tracking every angle. Vox was strapped to a tall execution frame at the plaza center. The collar's systems were synced to the master console. A flick of a switch, and he would twitch once and fall. But the switch wouldn't work. 6 hours to deployment. Across the galaxy, messages traveled silently. They were pre-programmed, disguised as transmission updates, weather pulses, agricultural software patches. No one intercepted them. Why would they? Humans were no longer considered dangerous. The code was meaningless to alien sensors. But to human survivors buried beneath ancient Mars bunkers or hiding in the magnetic fields of rogue planets, it was clear. Stage is set. Proceed to ignition points. Countdown locked. 3 hours to deployment. A technician adjusted the frame. Vox's heartbeat remained steady. He didn't look around, didn't blink against the blinding lights above him. His body ached. He had barely eaten in 3 days. But his mind was sharp, razor-edged, honed by years of loss, years of building something under their noses. The problem with being the weakest species in the galaxy wasn't the ridicule. It was the silence that followed it, the long, crushing irrelevance. Humans weren't hated anymore. They were forgotten. And that forgetfulness was their only advantage. 1 hour to deployment. He felt it in the ground first. A shiver beneath the metal. Tiny vibrations in the platform, masked as normal atmospheric fluctuation. But to him, they were familiar. He had helped build them. The codes buried in civilian satellites, the virus embedded in council relay beacons, the fusion triggers inside abandoned colony mines. None of it was centralized. It didn't need to be. He didn't need to press a button. He just had to be here. 30 minutes. The Drail overseer returned. You're quiet for a species that prides itself on noise. Vox replied without turning his head. You always thought our rage was noise. You never realized it was fuel. The overseer stared at him, uneasy. Then, without another word, it left. The final broadcast began. Cameras swept the platform. Alien announcers delivered rehearsed lines in dozens of languages. Vox stood still as a statue. He thought the first day the sky cracked. He remembered the faces of those lost, not in fire, but in obscurity, their memories hollowed out by galactic indifference. He had promised them, quietly, in the dark places no one looked, that they would be remembered, that when the end came, it would leave a scar no one could ignore. A countdown appeared on the main display. 10:00. 9 minutes. 8. 7. Beneath the plaza, deep in the engine shafts of the artificial moon, human-coded scripts activated. Secondary systems blinked. Atmospheric regulators spiked. Transit controls rerouted. Communications arrays began looping. 5 minutes. The alien commanders prepared their statement. One final declaration of peace and superiority. Vox bowed his head. 3 minutes. The collar sparked once. 2. 1. The lights went out. The plaza plunged into darkness, swallowing the spectacle in a void thicker than shadow. For one stunned heartbeat, there was no sound, no reaction from the dignitaries, no alarms, no flicker of comms. Just silence. Pure, sterile, and unnatural. Then the screaming started. Lights flared and died in stuttering pulses, casting jagged silhouettes of panicked soldiers and slithering banners. Cameras swiveled wildly, blind to the chaos. Alien officers barked orders, their translators glitching mid-sentence, spitting out garbled syllables. A siren tried to rise, faltered, and died with a mechanical whimper. Captain Rian Vox raised his head. The collar around his neck clicked once, then fell apart, its pieces clattering to the ground like broken shackles. His restraints hissed open. He stepped forward off the execution frame and stood unchallenged in the storm of confusion. Spotlights blinked madly overhead, failing to track him. He moved through the haze with deliberate steps, each footfall a revelation. No one stopped him. They were too busy fighting phantoms in the dark. Above, on the control deck of Telkura Base, alien commanders fought their systems. Their screens fed them lies. Sensors showed human fleets appearing in multiple directions. Some readings claimed oxygen leaks. Others reported internal detonations that hadn't yet happened. What they couldn't know was that all of it was true, and none of it was avoidable. Across the galaxy, Earth's so-called surrender had triggered a chain reaction. 58 simultaneous countermeasures buried inside the digital backbone of the compact. Rogue satellites activated, hijacking comms relays. AI deadlock loops froze planetary defense grids. Remote-controlled scavenger ships, disguised for decades as wrecks, burst to life and rammed into unsuspecting orbital stations. But here, on Telkura, it was more intimate. Explosions rumbled beneath the platform. Controlled, surgical, not enough to collapse the base, but enough to send tremors through its core and unravel its command hierarchy. Vox reached down and pulled a small blade from the inside of his boot. Not metal, but ceramic. Undetectable, sharp enough to open flesh, quiet enough to remain unnoticed. A nearby Marnai soldier spotted him, raised its plasma rifle. Vox ducked the shot and moved like a shadow. Fast, brutal, focused. One slice across the exposed throat, another across the knee joint. The creature dropped without a sound. He took the rifle, checked its charge, and turned toward the control hub. He wasn't the only one moving. From the edges of the plaza, more humans emerged, disguised as prisoners, technicians, even alien servants. They had been planted weeks in advance, some even years. They activated in unison now, drawing weapons stashed in air vents, utility compartments, or hidden beneath false skin. Within 60 seconds, over 24 operatives had taken key positions. The crowd of dignitaries collapsed inward in a stampede. Alien officials shoved one another, trampling guards, struggling to escape down corridors that no longer led anywhere. Vox's people had sealed the exits 2 minutes before the lights went out. The trap was not brute strength. It never had been. It was clarity, simplicity, pressure applied exactly when and where it would hurt the most. Vox reached the control station and shot the console twice, sparks flying. An officer lunged at him, Drail, tall and thin. He spun, fired once, and didn't watch it fall. His hand flew across the secondary interface, typing in a code that wasn't supposed to exist. The floor beneath the plaza began to separate, slowly revealing what the aliens had never guessed was there. Project Avernus. A long, coffin-shaped vessel, suspended in a gravity web. Old Earth design, ugly, asymmetric, its hull scarred with ancient writing and crude welds. The kind of weapon no alien species would build. Unpolished, unapologetic, and deeply, deeply dangerous. The dignitaries didn't understand what they were looking at. Their translators failed to name it. Their sensors couldn't scan it. Their instincts told them it was wrong. That was the point. Avernus was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a message wrapped in radiation and defiance. Its core held not a warhead, but something worse. The consciousness of every major human resistance leader lost during the first decade of the war. Uploaded, sharpened, distilled into one algorithmic drive. Avernus could not be negotiated with. It could not be reasoned with. It had one purpose: to remember, and in remembering, to destroy. Vox activated it. A hum, low and almost mournful, filled the plaza. Energy crackled across the vessel's body. Alien troops backed away, weapons raised in panic. Some fired. The bolts fizzled against its reinforced shell. On every broadcast screen across the galaxy, the signal flipped. Now they saw Vox. He stood before the rising vessel, his voice cold and clear. You called us weak. You called us broken. You burned our cities and erased our names. The feed pulsed, reaching systems even outside the compact's range. You believed that survival was silence. That surrender was submission. You mistook patience for defeat. He stepped aside as Avernus fully emerged. The hum rose, turning into a resonance that rattled bones. This is our answer. He ended the broadcast. Avernus launched. Not fast, not violent, but inevitable. It moved like a tomb, gliding silently through the disintegrating base, phasing through plasma fire and exploding walls without reaction. It transmitted no signal. It followed no logic. Its destination was unknown, even to Vox. That was the design. It would travel until it reached a place where fear lived. And then it would open. Vox turned from the launch bay as the base shook again. His people were already retreating through pre-drilled tunnels into the crust. Emergency beacons from within the moon now transmitted false evacuation paths, leading panicked dignitaries straight into sealed corridors. It wasn't slaughter. It was demonstration. A message carved in terror and precision. As he descended into the smoke-filled shafts, Vox allowed himself a breath. Not relief. Never that. But confirmation. They had heard the message. They would never unhear it. Outside, Telcura's atmosphere ignited. The sky turned gold, then black. And somewhere beyond the dying stars, Avernus flew on. Ash rained from the sky like snow, soft and gray, drifting in slow spirals over the broken remains of Telcura Base. Once a monument to galactic supremacy, now it lay in pieces, its towers shattered, its command spire buried beneath slag and smoke. Fires burned beneath collapsed decks. Alien bodies lay in twisted heaps, armor cracked, faces frozen in disbelief. No banners fluttered now. No cameras recorded. Captain Rian Vox stood at the edge of a crumbling platform, watching what remained of the plaza where his execution had been planned. His shoulders ached, ribs bruised, but his stance was steady. Beside him, two surviving operatives worked silently to sift through the wreckage, their eyes scanning for any hidden threats. None would come. There was no enemy left here. Only the echo of victory and the silence that follows when fear replaces arrogance. The final transmissions had reached across the galaxy. Every council-controlled system, every border outpost, every mercantile moon. They had all seen it. The collapse of Telcura, the human commander's message, and the launch of the Avernus vessel. What they hadn't seen was where it went. That even Vox didn't know. He had given it no target, no coordinates. It had been programmed to find where it could do the most damage, and to remember everything along the way. He looked to the sky. The clouds above were thinning, burned away by the explosion of the artificial atmosphere generator. Stars shone cold and clear, unbothered by the suffering below. Somewhere out there, fleets scrambled. Planets sealed their borders. Entire empires hesitated. That hesitation was the first victory. A voice crackled over the comlink attached to his collar. Vox. Extraction windows closing. You staying behind? He didn't respond at first. The wind carried the scent of ion burns and scorched metal. It reminded him of the first days of Earthfall. The same metallic bite, the same quiet dread. Only this time, the fear wasn't human. I'm on my way, he said, turning from the ruins. Each step away from the plaza felt heavier than the last. Down in the tunnels, the remaining strike team had already assembled. Faces marked with soot and exhaustion. Young, hardened, silent. But it didn't celebrate. There was no cheering. Just nods of acknowledgement and the mechanical rhythm of reloading weapons, patching wounds, preparing for whatever came next. Vox passed by a young scout, barely more than a boy, his hands trembling as he checked the charge on his sidearm. The captain paused. You did well, Vox said softly. The boy looked up, startled. Did we win? Vox held his gaze for a moment. We made them remember us. That's more than they ever expected. It wasn't a clean answer. There was no flag planted in victory, no enemy surrender. But in the eyes of the crew, it was enough. For now, they moved through the escape tunnels, winding beneath the crust of the moon, where waiting dropships had activated emergency beacons. Each ship was timed to launch in intervals, staggered to confuse any last-minute scans. The plan wasn't escape, it was dispersal. A flame spreads wider when broken into embers. As the strike team boarded the transport, Vox paused at the ramp's edge. He looked back one last time at the ruined moon. For a brief moment, he let the weight settle in. The cost. The names he could no longer say aloud. The cities lost. The children buried in shadows. The old man who taught him how to fight without ever holding a weapon. The woman who had whispered their anthem beneath the rubble of New Berlin. All of it gone, but not forgotten. He stepped aboard, and the hatch sealed behind him. The dropship launched in silence. Above, the stars turned slowly. In the days that followed, the compact reeled. No official statement was issued. Council records went dark. Rumors spread faster than sanctioned information. One system claimed the humans had built a weapon that erased memory itself. Another insisted Avernus was a god machine, seated by ancient beings in Earth's crust. Some believed it would come for them next. A few dismissed the event as overblown propaganda. But not many, and not loudly. More significant was the shift in tone. Where once humans were a punchline, now they were a warning. Don't underestimate them became a whisper passed in war rooms and council halls. Former collaborators with the Compact quietly severed ties. Smugglers who once trafficked human slaves now scrubbed their manifest clean. A few even offered reparations, as if guilt could be bartered like or. Humanity had not conquered anything, but they had proven one thing beyond doubt. They would not die politely. Vox stood on the bridge of a camouflaged frigate days later, watching a holographic projection of scattered refugee routes. Each line marked a vessel launched from one of the hidden outposts. Survivors, fighters, strategists, engineers, pieces of the species still alive and scattered, yet no longer hunted. For the first time in decades, no one was actively chasing them. Beside him, Commander Lisa Thorne reviewed satellite intercepts. She had led the infiltration team at Telcura's southern airlock. Half her unit didn't make it out. Her face bore new scars, one running from her jaw to her temple. Compact's quiet, she muttered. Scare, maybe. Or waiting. They'll respond, Vox said. You think they'll retaliate? Eventually, but not how they used to. They'll hesitate first. They'll talk among themselves. They'll ask questions they never asked before. Thorne folded her arms. And when they come? Vox looked at the projection. They'll find something different waiting. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You think Avernus is really out there doing what we designed it to do? He didn't answer directly. It remembers everything. That's all it needs. Silence stretched between them. The crew around them moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting course, checking supplies, scanning for interference. Not one of them smiled. Not one of them celebrated. Victory, in their world, was survival with dignity. Vox turned back to the window. The stars no longer looked distant. They looked open. There was no home to return to. Earth, in the traditional sense, was gone. But something had been built in its place. Not of soil or steel, but of memory, of fury, of names whispered in the dark and promises made in ruins. In time, the galaxy might forget Telcura. The Compact might rebuild. Other empires might rise and fall. But they would always look over their shoulder, because they had seen what happens when the weakest stop begging and begin to answer.